Good morning, everyone. We have our attendees filling up, but our panel participants are all here. So we will go ahead and get started because we want to be respectful of time. And thank you, everyone, for making the opportunity for us to have this workshop. We look forward to participation in the panels and would like to extend a welcome to all the participants and hope that you find something important and valuable as we are working through some of these issues together. We have a terrific panel this morning and two panels, and would like to really begin there. Kelsey, could you go to the next slide, please? So our time will go fairly quickly. So what we've built here is two panels. The first is to look at Colorado specifically. That's our most recent experience with passage of PDAB legislation as well as then implementation. We're very pleased to have State Senator Barb Kirkmeyer as our kickoff panelist. And thank you for making the time for us this morning, Senator. We know that this is a very busy day in the legislative schedule in Colorado, and so we appreciate the opportunity to have you with us. We'll be followed by comments from Dr. Madeline Feldman with the Coalition of State Rheumatology Organizations. She'll be followed by Laura Bunnell, who's the CEO of Living with Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And as many of you know, RAAP has worked very closely with the cystic fibrosis community in Colorado. It's throughout the implementation in 2023. And so we look forward to her comments as well. And then we will have the final comments and then a panel discussion by Bridget Serrett, who's the founder of Advocates for Compassionate Therapy Now. That will be followed by a second panel, which will look at the consequences of PDAB and how to organize and begin to express patient voices, concerns, and issues with PDAB on a much broader sense. And we have, again, an esteemed panel for that session, including Jen Laws, who's the president of the Community Access National Network, Derek Flowers, director of Value of Care Coalition, Tiffany Westreich Robertson, who's the chief executive officer of the International Foundation of Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis. So we have a lot of expertise in terms of the key issues, looking at not only PDABs, but some of the tools that they might be using and some of the other kind of mechanisms that they would look to put in place, and how we as patient advocates and life sciences advocates can be more effective. We will then wrap that up after those two panels with some conclusion comments, and then we will adjourn. Throughout this, what we'd like to do is have a conversation and dialogue, but also we'll be taking questions from all of you. So please feel free to send us questions, other things that may be of interest to you that we can talk to the panelists about. And so we will be monitoring that as well. Kelsey, could we go to the next slide? So we wanted to just start out and provide a little bit of background information before we turn the time over to our panelists. And as you know, PDABs are a fairly recent construction and policy direction. The first PDAB was put in place in 2019 in Maryland. And as you know, in 2023 and 2024, the Maryland PDAB has begun implementation. And so this is kind of an area that is emerging. 8 states have followed Maryland's path and passed legislation to implement PDABs, and all of them are in various states of that implementation. One state, Ohio, does not allow for an upper payment limit. And then a recent kind of wrinkle in the PDAB landscape was New Jersey's Drug Affordability Council that was created in 2023. And this is a legislative and regulatory policy council. And so recommendations that come from that council would then be recommended to the state legislature and to the governor, and then they would take action. So again, there's a lot of kind of variation between the states. And so we're looking at, not every PDAB is established and set up exactly like the other PDABs. And so we are basically looking at a similar construct in terms of putting together political appointments, looking at drug data, looking at different criteria, but then, different, implementation remit in terms of how they look at how they make their decisions. In 2024, we are seeing the introduction of PDAB legislation already beginning. The most recent PDAB legislation introduced is in Virginia. And RAAP has been involved, as many of you know, both in the legislative phase, but also in the regulatory and commenting phase in a number of states. And we anticipate being much more active in 2024. Next slide, please. So a little bit more detail. These slides will be going out after the workshop. And so you'll be able to look at some of the various things that are included in PDAB and some of their processes. And one thing to point out is that particularly in one state, Colorado, the creation of an advisory council that is linked with the PDAB, but is charged more with looking more strategically at the marketplace and making recommendations to the PDAB. They are not the implementation organization within that structure, but again, each state is a little bit different. So it gives you some other things that are included and are part of the PDAB process. Next slide, please. And again, you can see the activity is just starting to ratchet up, being in early January still. We have states coming on board in terms of their legislative sessions, and we expect this map to grow in terms of introduction of PDAB legislation. We've already seen some of it in the pre-filing, and we anticipate that this will continue through the spring. And so we will continue to update our web pages, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the wrap up. But RAAP will be monitoring the introduction of PDAB legislation, providing information on our web pages that patient advocates and life sciences advocates can go to and pull down from, and be able to get involved more quickly. But it's important to understand that many see PDABs as kind of a panacea to drug pricing, and are really looking at PDABs to make some big changes in terms of how drugs are priced. And yet at the same time, those mechanisms have unintended consequences, which we'll be discussing more this morning. So with that, we'll go to our first panel. We'll talk a little bit more about this at the end. I want to go ahead and jump into the panel discussion. And so again, we're pleased to have Senator Barb Kirkmeyer from Colorado, and we'll turn the time over to her to begin and kick off the first panel.
Great, thank you. So I can't see, I'm making sure, I just want to make sure that you can see me on the screen, because I can't see me on the screen.
We can.
Okay, great, fantastic. Well, then I will look at you while I talk, which is a good thing. So thank you very much for having me this morning to join the panel. Greatly appreciate it. You heard a little bit about Colorado, and as stated, you know, the idea behind PDABs, the Prescription Drug Affordability Boards, is that they're supposed to be making expensive medicines more accessible. The reality is, especially for here in Colorado, when we start really looking at this, even though we haven't totally implemented the legislation that was passed in 2021, we're very rural in nature. I mean, we have, you know, Denver, Colorado, which is huge, and we have along our Front Range is where most of our population is. But when you start talking about rural Colorado, which is essentially about 40 of our, actually it's probably closer to 50 of our 64 counties are rural in nature. It basically is just putting up more obstacles to access life-saving drugs. And that's where I've been going after it and trying to see if I can't get changes made. I sit in the minority in my legislature or my General Assembly, so it's been pretty difficult. I do, however, sit on the Joint Budget Committee, so that's been helpful in making sure that we're trying to at least stall things as much as we can until maybe we get to a more favorable legislature to really address the issue. I mean, I don't think there's anyone who is against trying to have affordable medicines, affordable drugs, but when you don't take into consideration access to those drugs, that starts causing a problem. We do have within our legislation the upper payment limit requirement or availability to do. We have, as you already stated, we have a advisory committee who's supposed to advise the actual Prescription Drug Affordability Board, who has the ability then to set an upper payment limit. We attempted in 21 to exempt out orphan drugs, for like rare diseases, that type of thing, but certainly orphan drugs in the first place. We weren't able to get that accomplished in the 21 session. So I do have legislation this year to exempt exemption for rare diseases, orphan drugs, those types of things. So we're feeling pretty good that we might be able to get that passed. But in the meantime, our board, after essentially 2 years, finally got their act together and decided to start looking at drugs. And they can do 5 a year. They only can do at the most look at 18 different medicines, different drugs, but they are doing 5 at a time. And this year they looked at drugs that they deemed to be unaffordable and that they could put an upper payment limit on. I'm trying to get to my list so I can read off what they picked. Just a second here. But they went after drugs like orphan drugs, the drug for cystic fibrosis. They went after autoimmune drugs for like rheumatoid arthritis, and several, like 3 or 4 other drugs. I'm trying to, if I find it, I had it written down and I can't find it now. But I'll let you know what those are. But again, it's been kind of a process here. They've spent a lot of money, haven't really done a lot of things to make drugs more affordable or medicines more affordable, but certainly have been working to make sure that drugs are not more accessible to folks, and that's causing an issue. So that's why I have yet a legislation this year to try and get to the orphan drug issue. The other thing that I don't think people understand, and certainly you all probably do, but from my perspective as far as legislators, is when we have these upper payment limits and we have a drug affordability board who can pick pretty much any drug they want, because like I said, they've just disregarded what the advisory council told them, because they said don't pick the orphan bill or the orphan drug, and they went ahead and did that anyways. But when they do that, we've got people here that are just greatly concerned that they're not going to have access to other drugs, or that other drugs, innovative type drugs are not going to be, it's going to stifle innovation with our pharmaceutical companies and our research companies. So that's another problem that we're seeing starting to already arise. It's like, why do you want to do business or market in Colorado when they're just going to try and make you sell your drug for less than it actually should be, and that you're not going to make money on it? So, and I'm not against people making money on anything. I just think we need to have this research. And, as I told people why I was the reason I'm carrying this bill to have this exemption for orphan drugs that are related to rare diseases is I have a cousin who has cystic fibrosis, and he's young, he's in his 40s. He's got 2 young boys. And 10 years ago, he was worried about how long he was going to live. And he's a 5th generation Coloradoan, so it's not like he just moved here or something, but he's here. We have a huge cystic fibrosis population. We've got the foundation here, a lot of things that are occurring. So the new medicines that are coming out that just in the last few years that he's been able to take advantage of, he now knows that he'll be able to see both his kids show their sheep at the county fair, graduate from high school, get married, hopefully see his own grandchildren, that type of thing, because of the drugs that are available. But if Colorado continues down the path that they're going, and they eliminate the drug that he's using that is truly life-saving medicine, he won't be able to have that type of future. And that's what Colorado is impacting. So again, we're still working on it. A lot of things that we're doing here in Colorado, but not there yet. And unfortunately, apparently, it seems like we are one of the lead states now. And I don't really like that. I wish we would stop, but we're not going to. So working my best from a minority position to make some changes here in Colorado. And I look forward to questions from folks. So I'll let our other panelists speak as well.
Well, thank you, Senator Kirkmeyer. And I
Sure.
know I have some questions for you as well. So we look forward to coming back with the Q&A. But we will move to the next panelist, and we'll turn the time over to Dr. Madeline Feldman.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you to the organization for having me. As was said in the introduction, I'm a rheumatologist, and I am on the board and Vice President of Advocacy and Government Affairs for the Coalition of State Rheumatology Organizations. And we've been following the PDAB issues from the very beginning. I was actually on a panel with the head of the PDAB in Maryland when they first were passed and legislated. So we did speak with the Colorado staff person following the list of drugs, which are, Enbrel, Stelara, and Cosentyx, 3 of which I use for my patients, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis. Some are also used for inflammatory bowel disease, or the HIV drug, or the cystic fibrosis drug. As you can see, these are all drugs for patients with chronic conditions. One of the issues that we brought to the staff person was sort of a misunderstanding, I think, by legislators of the drug supply chain. And we toss around that word access, but access involves 2 things: affordability and availability. So something could be extremely affordable, but if it's not available, think toilet paper the first year of COVID. It's cheap, but it was nowhere to be found. And I think the PDAB with the upper payment limits are going to affect both aspects. And the reason why I bring in affordability is because most of these drugs that are on the list, most patients pay very little to nothing for those drugs. So in terms of affordability, that's already there. Now, for self-insured employers in the state, yes, they probably would benefit from a lower price. But what they've got to understand is the middleman between the pharmaceutical manufacturer who sets the price and the actual purchaser within Colorado, there's a 50% probably drop in the price already that is just not passed on to the eventual buyer. The other side, and so that obviously will affect the availability, because if the middleman can't make the money on these drugs because the price is lower, it will no longer be on the formulary. And I think legislators need to understand, for a drug to be available even for the patient to have access to it, it has to be on the formulary. And one of the things they don't understand is that perhaps when this price is cut, the pharmacy benefit managers who actually set up the formulary, they may not put them on the formulary at all. Consequently, it will no longer be available to patients. And then the other aspect that we talked about, because several of these drugs that are on this list are provider administered. And that means that you receive it in your doctor's office or in the hospital. And in order for a provider to be able to continue to afford to deliver these drugs, whether it's an infusion or whether it's a shot given in the doctor's office, the physicians will no longer be able to afford these drugs. So again, once again, the patients will lose access. So I think the idea, it's very nice and almost somewhat sexy in order to say we're lowering the price of the drugs, but the misunderstanding about what happens to the availability of the drug, whether it's through lack of innovation, lack of being on the formulary, I think has been misunderstood. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen throughout the country. And as Senator Kirkmeyer said, there is, I think, a need for legislators to understand the drug supply channel a little bit more if they truly want to ensure that their constituents are having access to these medications. And thank you, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Feldman. We'll turn it over to Laura Bonnell for her comments and thoughts as well.
Thank you. I'm Laura Bonnell. I have 2 daughters with cystic fibrosis, and I started the Bonnell Foundation Living with Cystic Fibrosis in 2010. We help other families and we do a lot of advocacy. And first, I want to say to anybody that is new to this, it's overwhelming, but don't be overwhelmed. It took all of us a really long time to understand what all these acronyms mean and to remember what's what. So you'll pick it up quickly. But the CF population in Michigan, where I am from, is about 1,200. So when we're talking about the PDAB, the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, and what they're trying to do, it's a very small population. In Colorado even has a smaller population. So it even kind of going after these rare diseases doesn't even make sense from a financial standpoint. Yes, it's a lot of money for drugs that we believe are worth it, but it's a very small population. Some diseases only have 10 people in it. So it's really important that pharmaceutical companies are motivated to make drugs for small populations because it's critical to the people that we love and that we're concerned about. So what I'm going to do is go through quickly the timeline that we saw in Michigan. Colorado was a great example. They're great leaders. I appreciate all the work that rare disease group has done and continues to do because, as I've told many of them, we need you. We need your expertise here in Michigan because I think a lot of our lawmakers don't even understand what they're trying to put forward. What happened was, the first thing that happened was in her What's Coming Up Next address, our governor mentioned the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, and it seemed to take off from there. That was August 30th. By September 20th, the committee had lined up people to speak about it just before they were going to vote. So it was very fast. We got wind of it. We heard about it. We were trying to quickly organize and reach out to Amanda and people in Colorado to say, hey, what's happening? How can you help us? So when they had their first meeting, it was a very limited amount of time that was given for people to speak. And then a lot of speakers had already been lined up. They had AARP, which is a consumer group, not a patient group, right? So it's important to understand the difference between those. They're not necessarily looking out for the interest of patients like our kids or ourselves. So, and there were other speakers that weren't from Michigan, and I was not allowed to speak because of the time crunch. There was only 30 minutes. They did have my letter, but you know, it's important to be able to react to what's already been said. The other thing was there were 2 patients that spoke, but this is the reason I'm so glad that you're on this call, because the patients that spoke did not know the 360, everything about what the Prescription Drug Affordability Board does. I don't think they understood it. They were just hearing what I know as a former news reporter in Detroit is the sexy part of lower drugs. That's all anyone hears, is that drugs will be lowered. So August 30th, September 20th, they introduce it. They have testimony. October 4th, they vote on it. And to his credit, Senator Kevin Daly, he said this is being rammed through so fast, we don't even understand what's happening. And we had presented to them letters from Colorado, from the lawmakers there, who we are so grateful to, about, you know, issues that they saw, but still it was rammed through. As Senator Daly said, it was passed on October 4th. October 11th, then we literally ran to the House, like, how fast can we set up meetings in the House, because they need to understand what's happening. So we met with the chair, Brenda Carter, in the House, and they have said, and every House member that we talked to has said, they do believe that it went too fast. They want to understand it better. They want to slow things down. And I hope, and I want to believe that that is in fact the case. We gave every House member amendments amendments that we want the patient voice included, that we need to get discriminatory measures off. And I've reached out to them again yesterday. So hopefully they are listening and we can slow this down so that they understand more of what's going on. I would say if there was a call to action to all of you in Michigan or your state that's thinking about the Prescription Drug Affordability Board that we call PDAB, I would say it's to get people involved in your rare disease community, which would include social workers, nurses, doctors, your healthcare clinic, your team, because that's really important to have that kind of strength. I recently, and I am continuing to go around and speak at hospitals to doctors because I want them to know it's important to understand this legislation because it will impact their patients, and really good feedback. So they're realizing how important it is that they're involved. So, and that's what I would say. If you are experiencing the PDAB coming to your state, that's the biggest thing you could start off doing.
Thank you, Laura. Our final speaker for this panel is Bridget Serrett, and she's again the founder for Advocates for Compassionate Therapy Now. We'll turn the time over to you, Bridget, and then we'll open it up to more of a discussion.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. I have been working very closely with Colorado Patients Taking Action, which is a patient-based coalition working to make sure that the PDABs actually represent the patient voice and things are truly, they remain accessible for patients. Our biggest concern right now is that patients aren't represented on the council or in the board, and most patients have no idea what's going on. They don't understand the nuances around what's going on, and they hear the very lovely lower cost drugs. But even if you were to have some of these drugs as far as cost goes, it's still not going to make a difference with what we pay or our access. I work very closely with our special needs community here in Colorado Springs, and we've actually capped 2 other things, and already the EpiPen cap just went into place and people are having trouble finding their EpiPens. And with insulin, we still have patients that are struggling and paying hundreds of dollars a month. So they don't quite understand the nuances and how everything works. The other main concern that we have is Medicaid patients, TRICARE, because Colorado is very military. I'm in Colorado Springs and we've got 5 bases around us. Most of these folks don't have access to the manufacturer rebate programs, and that's why they don't have the access to their medications. PDABs are not going to change that. That's a federal law. And so that's something that we're really concerned about. And we've started the lobby process to be sure patient voices are represented. I'm working with some of our providers like UC Health and Optum, trying to get things moving and make patients aware of what's going on. And then I've just been reaching out to our patient community like mad. Colorado has 335 drugs they are reviewing, many of which they may not be orphan drugs. However, they treat very rare issues. So like human growth hormone and things like that. So we want to be sure that the patients understand that they're engaged with the process and that the process ultimately benefits the end user and not all of the other companies.
Thank you. And thank you all the panelists for your comments. I do have some questions I want to start to begin the discussion with. And I think, Senator Kirkmeyer, you kind of teed it up a little bit in terms of patient benefit. And, when you look at Colorado the access is provided to most Coloradans through their insurance carrier, their PBMs, their plans, et cetera. And those plans set the copays, they set the premiums. So what you're paying for a drug is actually set by the plan, not necessarily the cost of the drug. Was there any discussion about how that benefit would be translated into to the patients and how they would be able to either get lower copays, lower premiums, or any of the things that would be associated with lowering drug costs?
Thank you for the question. There was very limited discussion with regard to the plans, the copay, and what people are actually paying for the drugs. I mean, we did bring up the Medicaid, you know, that it's in our state, it's only like $4 or something that they have to pay. I mean, it was really low cost back in 23 with their copay, or back in 21, I'm sorry. But it was brought up and it was similarly just dismissed. I mean, the whole mission, the whole branding messaging was about, we're going to make sure you have affordable drugs. That was it. You know, they didn't really talk about I mean, they meaning the Democrats and the folks who were carrying this bill. And this came out of the governor's office. So we were already behind to begin with. It came out of the governor's office and it was all about, we're making healthcare more affordable for everybody. And that was it. That was their message. It wasn't about, you know, for those of you who live in rural Colorado, your hospitals are already struggling. You'll have to go farther for your medicines, you know, travel time, distance. I mean, we're talking, it could take them 8 hours round trip to get someplace to get the drugs, right, that they need. And then if there's an upper payment limit on it and it's no longer even available in our state, then what are they supposed to do? Our hospitals, especially again, our rural hospitals, are at a situation where they are barely making it. I mean, we're talking about hospitals that are talking about closing, and then they're going to have to go pay a lot more money for some drugs and then use them and sell them, or in a way, provide them in a way and make it less expensive, where again, they just don't have enough money. I mean, we're having a situation in our state with Medicaid providers that we are not increasing the Medicaid provider rate enough to keep Medicaid providers in our state for all sorts of types of things. So yes, I mean, to answer your question, yes, it was talked about, but it pretty much just got dismissed. I mean, the message was, we're here for you, Colorado, and we're going to make sure that your drugs are more affordable. That's it. And anytime we tried to say anything different, it was like, oh, you're trying to keep the cost of drugs up for, you know, for people, and that you're just big pharma people.
You know, a lot of our panelists talked about the importance of advocacy, whether it's professional advocacy, whether it's doctors and nurses and specialists, as well as then patients from various patient groups, and particularly rare disease. We saw a lot of rare disease involvement in Colorado. What was interesting to me is that Colorado had recently put in place a rare disease advisory council, and yet there were no linkages to the PDAB to pull in patients, specialists, and expertise in rare diseases when they first got their PDAC recommendations, and it was largely rare disease drugs on the PDAC recommendations. And then finally, the PDAB recommendation to you know, look at rare disease medicine as their first product up. And so it seemed to me like a missed opportunity to involve patients from the beginning. And in fact, many of you testified before the PDAB. I would like to hear a little bit about your experience and making those linkages, and what worked and what didn't work in Colorado in terms of involving community patients, physicians, specialists in the process.
Does Bridget want to take that question? You're on mute, Bridget.
Bridget. You're on mute, Bridget.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. I gladly take this question. In my community, we found that not very many people actually are aware of what's going on at all. There's no media about it. The state hasn't reached out to providers. They haven't worked with the CDPHE, which is our health department. And the patient engagement was actually incredibly low. When I went and talked to our providers, they had no idea what was going on. Several of the big providers like Optum and UC Health and Centura, they do have people who are involved with it and watching it, but they're not putting any information out. So right now, patients and the community, not only do they not know what's going on, they don't know they have an opportunity to engage or how. It's all on the state's website, and you have to scroll down and then download documents in order to figure out what's going on, and it's cumbersome. And frankly, as patients, we don't have the time, and half the time we don't have the mental capacity to be able to figure all of this out and deal with daily life and work and our children and our families at the same time. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement with regards to patient involvement.
And Laura,
And-
would you like to
and-
be in here?
Oh, I was
I
just
thought
going to say, so the Rare Disease Advisory Council is a council that brings in a collaborative group of people that includes insurance companies and doctors and patients and representatives, and it gives lawmakers somebody to access. The council is a group of people that can answer questions and give advice. And it would have been very helpful if in Colorado, where they do have a PDAB, if they would have been able to make the connection in regard to the PDAB. I think one of the things in Michigan too that lawmakers didn't do was they did not go to their constituents. They didn't say, hey, we're thinking about the PDAB. They rammed it through faster than our Rare Disease Advisory Council, which still isn't even approved, that gives a voice to the entire community from pharma to the insurance companies. So I think that's a factor as well. Sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, Laura, thank you. I wanted to touch on a comment that Senator Kirkmeyer had made about, when you bring up policy concerns about a PDAB, about how it's constructed, the way that it will benefit patients, how do we get those savings back to patients to improve access, et cetera, that often, you may be labeled as, oh, you're just in this for pharma. And rather than that you have legitimate policy concerns. And I think, as we look at how PDABs were constructed and then implemented, there isn't very much understanding of the pharmaceutical ecosystem, how that operates within a state, and then how patients actually pay for their medicines. Would some of our panelists like to comment on how we can better help communicate that? Because again, I think there are attempts to really kind of lower the value of your comments by saying, oh, you're just big pharma, instead of addressing the policy concerns. And I'd
Mike,
like to chat about that.
I can make a couple of comments on that. I've been lecturing on the middlemen and pharmacy benefit managers for now probably 8 or 9 years. And just, I think here's an example of showing what happens when you have a lower price drug. In rheumatoid arthritis, we have 3 drugs that have the same, what is known as mechanism of action. They work the same way to treat rheumatoid arthritis. One is about $30,000 a year, one is about $70,000, and one is about $80,000 a year. The only drug that patients have no access to is the one that's $30,000 a year. And you go, but wait a minute. That's the lowest price drug. People don't understand the lowest price drug is not favorable to the entity that creates the formulary, because that entity can't make any money on it. So when drug companies actually try to lower the price of their drug, oftentimes they're kicked off the formulary. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens to the drugs that Colorado has put on the formulary. So when you've got $30,000, $70,000, and $80,000 a year, and the only drugs patients have no access to, and I don't think legislators understand by arbitrarily lowering the price of the drug that it actually is going to decrease the availability of that drug. And I think that's an important point that they need to understand. And that takes education. And I can tell you the middlemen want to make it seem like that's a very complicated system. I'm not letting pharma off the hook. Absolutely, there are drug manufacturers that have prices that are inconceivable. But unless you understand the entire supply chain and what you're doing by price fixing at that level, price fix at the generic level. There are generic drugs for cancer that you can buy through certain direct pharmacies for $25, but when you go to the pharmacy for this generic drug, it's in the hundreds of dollars. That's where the affordability issues are, not necessarily with these specialty drugs for the chronic conditions.
And let me just add to that, because we had a one-pager about the supply chain. And when this bill was going through, it was my first legislative session. And I had to sit down with several people, the plans people, the PDM people, the pharmaceutical folks, all of them, and have them all walk me through the bill. And I don't think I'm an unintelligent woman, but there was a lot to it. So my suggestion would be, I mean, the one pager was good, but legislators, this is how a bill goes in Colorado. It gets introduced, it goes into a committee. That's where the public has the opportunity to speak. 2 minutes. They get 2 to 3 minutes max to speak, each individual. And then from there, it goes to the floor. In my case, it goes to the Senate floor, which is where the legislators debate it. And we only debate on second reading, because that's the first, the first reading is in committee. The second reading is that first time it's on the Senate floor. The third reading is where we actually do our vote, and it's recorded. And it's not, there's limited amount of time for us to debate. So the debate occurs on the second reading. So, we got the one pager out to everybody. We were trying to talk to everybody about it, but legislators, all these other bills that they're trying to carry, they rely on certain legislators to kind of carry the water on certain topics. Your best bet as a patient advocate is to have a patient in each legislative district, dog that legislator, sit down, meet with them, discuss them. And it would be great if you could discuss the supply chain to some extent, but bottom line is you need to get down to how it is impacting your access to the drug in the first place. They don't get it, they don't understand it. In Colorado, we have people who don't, live on the borders, like they maybe could go across to Wyoming up into Cheyenne and get the drug. No, they can't. They can't get it. If it's being administered by their doctor here in Colorado, they have to abide by the state law here. So it's those types of things that it's the patient. You have the best voice, but you've got to go have that discussion with your legislator one-on-one. And even if the bill just came up and it got pushed through, we've had this happen, you still need to find people in each of your legislative seats who has a relationship with that legislator or is willing to go get a relationship with that legislator and have that discussion. It's like, look, you are not making it affordable. Stop listening to the commercials. Stop listening to the political garbage that's coming out about how we're making drugs affordable for every Coloradoan when they're making them so they're not attainable, therefore they don't have access. It doesn't matter what you make the upper limit price to. If I can't get the drug, I'm not getting the drug I need or my child needs, or in my case, my cousin needs, that type of thing. So you need to go have that direct relationship where you have that half hour conversation with your legislator and you tell them directly, I want to make sure I get my drugs. This is going to make sure I don't get my drugs. My plans, unless you make changes someplace else in the supply chain, my copay is still my copay. You're not saving me one damn cent. You're just taking my affordability. You're taking my access to a drug I need, a life-saving drug I need, away from me. That is your best route. It's not going to, I'm just telling you, we had over 35 legislators sign a letter to our executive director of healthcare policy and finance, and to our director of insurance. They are the two people that oversee the PDAB board, essentially. They're the mover and shakers, the drivers, the influencers. They carry the governor's water. We had 35 legislators send a letter to them saying, do not put an upper payment limit on orphan drugs or on, make an exception for rare disease type drugs. We got a letter back that was basically like, well, you all wrote the law and it said we can look at everything we want it and we're going to. I really paraphrased that down and narrowed it down, but that's essentially what it said. So they don't want to listen to even legislators. And it wasn't just Republican legislators. It was a bipartisan letter. It was led by a Democrat senator. So they don't even listen to their own at this point. So it's really going to be up to the patients. It's going to be up to the people who aren't going to be able to attain their drug, go get access to their drug, go get their drug. It's going to be up to you, Bridget. Sorry, but it is. It's up to you and getting a patient. And all of us who are, I talk to I don't need people talking to me as a legislator, and obviously the people who are on there, but they should still go talk to them. We want every legislator to have a 3 to 5 minute, discussion at the microphone that says, look, I spoke to 10 people in my district that are patients, and they said they can't get their drug. We didn't make it affordable. And we need everybody to be doing that. And it's going to have to be people, patients, regular folks making that pitch. That's where it's got to come from.
Absolutely would agree with that. That's the biggest issue, because for a patient, and I'm a patient group, we don't take any money from pharmaceuticals or anything like that. It comes down to access. And as a personal story, I lost access to the one rheumatoid arthritis drug that works for me. I lost access for 4 years. And next week I'm having neurosurgery to put my head back on. I don't know if everybody can see how stiff I am. The disease that I have, even though the word arthritis is in it and there's multiple drugs, only one works. And if I don't have access to it, my body, my organs, everything shuts down. And I don't think patients truly understand the ramifications if a medication, an upper payment limit is hit, and providers, the manufacturers pull that drug. A lot of people are going to lose the ability to work. They're going to lose the ability to treat their children, and people could potentially die from this. Unfortunately, what's happening is you see the media is out there going, oh, we're lowering the cost of drugs. And the question is for who? Because when it comes down to it, the patients, when I talk with them, they're like, oh, that's good. These drugs are so expensive. And I'm like, oh, what do you pay for it? And they're like, well, I really don't pay anything for it.
Exactly.
So it's affordable for them, but they don't understand the implications. They don't understand this is not going to impact them, but it's going to, as far as price goes, it's going to impact their access. And that's devastating for all of us.
And one thing I also wanted to add real quick, and bravo, I would give you both a standing ovation because it was very well said, Senator. And anytime you want to move to Michigan, we could use you here. But the other thing I wanted to say is we have a sponsor for our Rare Disease Advisory Council who has Becker's MD, and he totally gets it. So those kinds of things too, finding these people within the lawmakers. There's another, our sponsor is a Democrat, and then the Republican, he was a senator, now he's in the House, but he has a sister with cystic fibrosis. So I always look, because like I say to them, if you don't know somebody who has a rare disease, you will. I'm sorry to tell you, you will at some point. And so everyone will be impacted. So good points.
Yes.
I just have one question, then we're going to have to move to the next panel. And this was interesting. This is from our attendees, and it has to do with the upper payment limit and who actually would have to pay the upper payment limit, or who does that apply to? And the question is, does the upper payment limit apply to the PBMs and the hospitals and providers? A lot of people think that they're doing something to save money for patients, and that upper payment limit will lower the cost of patient. Could you explain that a little bit? Or can someone talk a little bit about really where does that upper payment limit apply, and how does that affect the patient out of pocket? Because it seems like there's the disconnect between what the patient pays, which is a copay or a premium, versus what the PBM pays.
Yes, it's not the upper payment limit of what the patient is going to pay. It's going to be the upper payment limit if that sale goes on anywhere within the state of Colorado. So for those patients who have regular commercial insurance and everything is handled through out-of-state insurance companies, it's not going to really affect their ability to get the drug any cheaper. It's not going to affect them. However, if there is any entity within the state of Colorado that is purchasing that drug, it cannot be sold to anyone within the state of Colorado for less than that upper payment limit. And Senator Kirkmeyer, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, no, she's correct.
So if I'm a PBM and I purchase my drugs, let's say I'm a PBM and I operate in multiple states, and my drugs are purchased, for those multiple states, and I have to purchase at a higher price, yet I can only sell in Colorado at the lower upper payment limit. That
So
has an
yes,
impact, doesn't it?
it's so when you think of who actually buys drugs within the state, it is the state because it's self-insured, and it is large employers. So the large employer will not have to pay above that upper payment limit. But if the pharmacy benefit manager has paid a higher price and then got a rebate, but there is no margin, they'll just take that, and this is what all the patients are saying, they just will not avail that employer of that drug because they can't make any money. The employer cannot pay more than the upper payment limit. So the PBM just won't purchase that drug from the manufacturer because they can't make any money on it. So employers, their employees will lose, as Bridget and the senator and Laura have so aptly said, will lose the choice of even having that drug. So those are the ones that are purchasing it. And of course, the pharmacist will be involved in this as well, because you have to find someone that will sell it to you for a low enough price so that if you are a provider, you can't charge more than a certain amount. So as a provider that might infuse Stelara or Cosentyx in my office, if I can't buy it for less than the upper payment limit, I can't offer it to my patients. And it's going to be very difficult for the providers to buy it for less than what they will be reimbursed based on the upper payment limit. Once again, patients will lose access to getting that drug. It is nice and dandy, as everyone has said, that makes it more affordable, but if it ain't available, no one gets the drug.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've seen that with EpiPens and certain forms of insulin as well. We have pharmacies that are no longer providing those particular medications, and our parents are struggling, and patients are struggling trying to find them because the pharmacy can't get them.
Well, thank
Because they're
you.
not going to make any money off of it. They can't stay in
Exactly.
business. That's the problem. They could go get it at the lower rate and have to sell it at a lower rate. It'll cost them more than what they can sell it for.
Exactly.
Supply and demand. So how long do they want to stay in business for? Right?
If you want more,
at Walmart, it's called a lost leader. At a pharmacist, it's called how we go out of business.
Yeah.
For
If you
our
want
rural
more-
hospitals and our doctors, it's how we go out of business.
Well,
And so when they go out of business, there's no more accessing the drug, and they can't go across state line and go buy it. They can't do that. That would be against the law, and they'd have a huge problem.
independent rural pharmacists are going out of business throughout the country. So if Colorado wants to lose more independent community pharmacists, implement this law.
and
Yep,
to
there you
that
go.
point, and what we saw in Colorado was that a majority of the products selected served very few Coloradans. And so you are talking about specialty medicine, and you are talking about rare diseases.
Yes.
When almost half of your drugs selected to review benefited maybe less than 25 or 50 Coloradans in a given year. And so
It
that's
almost seems-
kind of what they were looking at in terms of, the way that the process was set up.
It almost seems discriminatory. I mean, because the patients that are going to be affected by this are those with chronic diseases. And so you put in a policy that discriminates essentially against patients with chronic diseases. That should be illegal, actually.
I'll work on it. But
Well,
I
thank
do
you.
have to go. I'm sorry, I've got stuff going on here. It's our opening day and I have to go. But I
Well,
really
thank you.
appreciate, I just really appreciate the opportunity to have this panel. I took a lot of notes. I got my bill going through. I'm going to use some of this some of this language. And Bridget, I hope to see you.
You will.
All right, sounds great. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator, and thank
Take
you
care.
to our
Thank you.
panelists. We really appreciated being able to talk about Colorado, and of course, how Colorado, Laura, impacted Michigan, and some of the nuances of having to work through the process. So with that, thank you again, and we'll close this panel and then move to our next panel. Our next panel is really going to focus on the unintended consequences of PDAB and advocating for patient access. Now, of course, as you all know, at the Rare Access Action Project, we are very focused on rare patients, but our esteemed colleagues on both panels not only advocate for specialty medicine and at times rare diseases, but they have other disease populations. And I think that's reflective of the nature of the coalition work that we do together in these issues and at the state level, that a lot of us do work together collegially and work together in coalition. And I think that's reflected in the panelists, their expertise and their understanding of patient access. So I'm really excited about this second panel as well. And again, we will be looking at your questions, trying to work those into the discussion portion of our panel. So please continue to keep the questions coming. If we don't get to questions during the conversation in the workshop, we will actually send out the questions to members of our panel and have that as part of our post-workshop communications out to all of you. So please continue to send those questions, and we look forward to working through those in the discussion portion. On this panel, again, we'd like to turn the time over to Jen Laws. Jen is the president of the Community Access National Network. This is an organization that's close to my heart. As many of you know, I began my career and worked with a coalition called the Title II Community Community AIDS National Network, which over time evolved and grew into the Community Access National Network. So it's a really amazing organization, and I'll turn the time over to Jen.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much. And yes, when you guys reached out, I was kind of excited because that history was sitting in my ear and it made my heart happy. So thank you all for that. Well, so CAN focuses on, and that's Community Access National Network, focuses on HIV and hepatitis C and kind of defining the issues around access to care in these spaces. And we're kind of uniquely situated both as dealing with public health issues broadly, but also having the support of specific federal programming through the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program. So there's some very, very interesting dynamics in terms of what we view as unintended consequences. But I want to start with Bridget's question on savings for who is really well noted. Most of these PDABs, and indeed I would say all of them that include an upper price limit, have no mandatory passback of savings. So even if you could have patients accessing medications at these upper payment limits or anything else like that, like there's no disruption in terms of that access. There is no requirement whatsoever for that savings to pass through to patients, which means that as patients, we might not see anything change. And the greatest risk is losing that access. And that's really where we start talking about unintended consequences. I think that what's happening in these legislatures is they don't understand how this works. I think that was really kind of emphasized kind of well. These PDABs are typically situated with the Department of Insurance, but not within other state expertise that might actually be really well situated to kind of evaluate the policy issues at play. And that's kind of a problem. We saw that in Colorado when they didn't reach out to the public health department, and public health departments in every state have their hands in HIV/AIDS programming because of these federal programming dollars. And each of those under that federal statute require community engagement. So you've got this really ready base of patient engagement, whether it's heart disease, HIV, diabetes, early childhood illnesses, all kinds of stuff. These public health departments really have these really tight-knit connections with contracted service providers, with patients, with schools, teachers, like all of these really great connections, and they didn't reach out once, not once, to the public health department. And the public health department on the back end, which we're not supposed to really talk about, they don't have somebody working there anymore, was actually told by a previous director not to reach out to DOI. And that's a massive problem. because this immediate community connection where we're looking for insight and involvement and all of these things becomes kind of frustrated because of the bureaucracy and because the Department of Insurance doesn't know supply chain, like period at the end, right? So when we talk about these issues and what it means for health conditions like HIV, HIV is antiretrovirals are protected under both the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, but also as a member of the 6 protected classes. So and a lot of medications used to treat rare diseases are also captured under that 6 protected classes piece, especially when we're looking at co-occurring conditions. But HIV has to be treated very specifically on its genotype. It is class specific. And if you see a disruption in care or any kind of like access issue that stops someone from taking that particular very individualized medication, they lose ability for that medication to work in their treatment management of HIV for the rest of their lives. That resistance builds up immediately. And when you're talking about prioritizing a particular medication because it's costing less to the state, now you're carving out that individualized care that sets up for treatment success. And we see that same story when we look at Trikafta, for example, right? Like that was up there. Jimboya's the HIV medication that's been listed and under review right now. And we see it in other spaces, right? They wanted to look at Eliquis, right? And that's a blood thinning agent. In 12 years ago, before the factor 10 showed up, people had to take Coumadin or warfarin, and that meant going into a hospital or a treatment center with these blood thinners that they had to balance out literally daily for a week or two, and then it was every other day for a week or two, and then they might balance you out and then have to reset you and things like that. And you're talking about life-saving, you're talking about stopping clots, you're talking about stopping heart attacks, you're talking about stopping pulmonary embolisms and deep vein thrombosis, and all of these things that kind of show up over time, especially in rare disease, co-occurring conditions in rare diseases. And disruption to life, and ability to be involved with your kids, with your family, constant care disruption. And that's changed with Eliquis and Xarelto with these factor 10. Here's a pill, you take it once or twice a day, go enjoy your families. That is life-changing innovation. So when we talk about potential disruption to access to care and this individualized care, individualized treatment that sets you up for success, we're also talking about innovation. Both things are true. And it's very, very important that we talk about how those things are changing our lives for the better and what it means for us to potentially lose that.
Thanks, Jen. And we'll come back to some of those themes that you just kind of, shared with us. And I will really dig into those in the discussion. Derek Flowers is the director with the Value of Care Coalition. And we'll turn the time over to you, Derek.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. As Mike mentioned, I'm Derek Flowers, working with the Value of Care Coalition, and it's a new group that's being launched with the focus on PDABs, as we've seen, this issue really become front and center throughout the last, especially 6 months with what's been going on in Colorado, but more slowly over the years as legislatures have been looking at this. And so, when we look at these things, we tend to take a high level view. And so the way we're thinking about it is this, right? Everybody that's talking about PDABs from the policy perspective is looking at cost, right? It's all about cost. We've had questions on here about cost to who, right? Cost to patients is who needs to benefit. But from our perspective, cost and value aren't necessarily the same thing. And so the way we look at it is that value really needs to be defined by those who know, right? Not necessarily economists or theoretical experts, but people who are dealing with these things every day. Clinicians, doctors, patients, and advocates for, the rare disease community, friends and families, caregivers. We all know that medicine can be expensive, but the point is that policies that stifle innovation and restrict access can be expensive too. And so we advocate for health policies that allow for better health outcomes, fair access to affordable, high quality treatments. And again, being defined by those on the front lines of healthcare when it comes to value. And so as we look at what's happening in the states, we obviously see that some policy approaches overlook what matters to patients and providers. And a great example of that is the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, for all the reasons that we've discussed today. And so, you know, I won't go on about all the things that we're looking at as we launch this and think about these issues in the high level. But as we come back to questions and answers, you know, Mike, I hope there's an opportunity to talk about what we view as, you know, the questions that policymakers should be asking themselves as they really think about these things, and how we're seeing some of these bad policies spread. And of course, you know, as we've talked about already, what can advocates do to stop that spread?
Terrific. And thank you, Derek. And I'm just looking at some of the submitted questions, so I know we're going to come back to that question. So thank you. Tiffany, we'll turn the time over to you. Tiffany is the Chief Executive Officer at the International Foundation for Autoimmune and Autoinflammatory Arthritis. And Tiffany, we'll turn it over to you.
Sure. And we say AI arthritis for short because it's a really long name. So yes, thank you. And we do cover a very niche group. So there's over 100 autoimmune and autoinflammatory diseases, but only about 20 something actually include that inflammatory arthritis as a clinical component. And it was actually patients who realized, wow, if we had a nonprofit that only focuses on these, maybe we could join together and make more impact. And I say that, I preface that as patient ideated for a reason. I'll get back to that. So one of the things that how we work in our organization is everything we develop. I'm also a person living with axial spondyloarthritis. All of our staff leaders are affected by the diseases. So we say we don't represent the patient voice, we are the patient voice. So that in addition to our volunteers. So we really are a crew of people with lived experience. And we take our lived experience, identify missing gaps on what needs to be solved without duplicating efforts. And then we create peer-led guidance through collaboration and resources, all driven by patient-identified issues and solutions. So we do this also with a global network philosophy, meaning we know that together we're stronger. And if we work together, as we've all talked about earlier, then we can have the most impact. So one of the things that I want to just throw on the table before we open the conversation is we're talking about these unintended consequences. And I'm not going to repeat all of the eloquent statements that were done before as far as access. I think those are all amazing points. I'm going to want to focus in our conversation on the roadmap, the uncertain roadmap. So we're all thrust into this, and there's a lot of concerns on these unintended consequences where there's an end result. Yeah, it's great that we're going to save money on drugs and these advertisements that are, as people have said, misleading patients, but they've got an end, their eye on the prize, but the methodology to get there is in process. They're literally figuring this out, meaning the PDABs. And I'm also going to reference CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also doing something similar with the affordability reviews. There's a process that they're figuring out. And that is where people with lived experience can really dive in and start to work with these groups, in addition to the coalitions comprised of patient organizations, but having a patient coalition in particular who's also learning, who's also meeting with these PDABs is going to be vital. And that is what AI Arthritis is starting, a national network coalition called Ensuring Access Through Collaborative Health, or EACH, because we do need to think about the subgroups, as Maddie Feldman so well put out. It's your access and your affordability is going to be different per subgroups. And so EACH is in the title. And then there's a separate second tier coalition called the Patient Inclusion Council. And we are going to model the exercises and the learning activities after our grassroots program called Knowledge is Empowerment, which is a patient-led class with all different varieties of ways that you can get involved through elevated experiences learning from patients. So, and that is disease agnostic, meaning anyone affected by PDABs or these affordability reviews, we invite to join.
Well, terrific. And thank you for the overview, Tiffany, and look forward to the discussion that we're going to kick off here. I wanted to turn just really quickly to one of the questions that came in from our participants. And there's a couple of really good questions here. So let me start here. You know, as we were talking about how PDABs are organized, the criteria that they look at for exploring which drugs to review, and then how to jump into what methodology they use. One of the things that we're seeing is that there is, you know, particularly in Colorado, but also in some of the other PDABs, is that WAC price is like the driver for identifying which drug that they're going to put on a priority to review. And yet we know that one, WAC price is not what the marketplace pays. And two, that there are other costs and other issues, both in the pharmaceutical kind of acumen, but also that there's a broader healthcare costs that are associated both with not treatment, suboptimal treatment, as Jen talked about, switching treatments through either forced formularies or dropping specific drugs from formularies, et cetera. And so the question is just structurally, how do these PDABs and how in general are they looking at which costs to look at when it comes to trying to identify what is an affordable therapy and what is not an affordable therapy?
Well, so the funny thing about that is they don't know. And that's, I mean, that's as honest as I can get about it. They end up with these little sets of data, right? And it's all proprietary data that they've acquired from a not disinterested contractor. And that's all I've got to say about that. Because these conflict of interest pieces in the statute don't include the contractors they might hire. Cheers. And that's important to note. When we offer amendments, it's one of the things we point out. But like when we talk about these cost metrics, those not disinterested contractors don't have any access to things like patient assistance programs or third-party payer programs that are helping patients access that full stream of care, right? Because I can't get treatment if I ain't diagnosed. And that's a giant piece of this. I hear it's come up in Colorado a couple of times. You know, what about uninsured patients? What about them? There is nothing about a PDAB that addresses any of the needs that uninsured patients face. There's nothing about a PDAB that sits there and says, I'm going to have food security and stable housing that are the biggest driving factors that actually allow me to take my antiretroviral, right? Like I have to, for most antiretrovirals, you need to eat with it. Otherwise, the mechanism doesn't work. These are big issues when we talk about transportation, all of that in terms of access. But they don't, like, flat out DOI has turned around and said, well, we don't know what the actual metric of cost that we should be considering, and we're just going to kind of do it on a case-by-case basis because we don't know. And what they're telling you is that they're going to let their political interest drive what drugs are selected. And that's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and Mike, I just add to that. I mean, the start of your question raises a good point too, that in each state, it's different. Not perhaps I think the metrics probably are different in each state where they're getting their data, to Jen's point too. But even the way that they're going about selecting which drugs they're going to look at are different from state to state, right? What criteria are they looking at? And that can be frustrating for advocates, not only on a state-by-state basis, but also on a year-by-year basis, right? Colorado, for example, this year did this set of drugs. What are they going to do next year? We'll see, you know? And so it's a little bit challenging that way too.
Thanks. Yeah, it is, and one of those things, and I think Jen brought it up, you know, when we look at kind of that whole system there, and we're looking at just the price or the list price of a product, but we're not looking at copay foundations. We're not looking at, you know, charitable contributions, patient assistance programs, other things that fill in the kind of social network to provide access. And then we're not looking at copays, tiers and copays, impact on premiums and things like that, so that we can get an overall picture of what the cost is to the patient. And that's you know, Derek, to your point, whether we look across state lines or not, those are the things that seem to be missing from most of the state deliberations that I know I've been involved in. And, when you start looking at, for example, just a WAC price and you end up with mainly orphan drugs on the list because they treat maybe 25 Coloradans, or maybe across the US, maybe 250, 300 patients, versus, all the costs in the healthcare system. You start to think about, okay, what impact is that really going to have on lowering costs? Is it going to lower copays? Is it going to move, carriers to move that product now into a lower copay tier? Where's the savings really coming for the patient? And that's not really anything that's I've seen addressed. And it seems to me that's kind of the missing link with PDABs, not knowing how to get to, hey, how can I save patients money? It could be in funding transportation. It could be in maybe earlier diagnosis, better, newborn screening, whole genome sequencing, new technologies that can get patients into care and on drug faster. There may be combinations of things, and we're kind of looking at one pathway here. So go
want
ahead.
to point out real quick, there are zero monitoring metrics. There's zero requirement for any of these PDABs to come back around and look at any of the impact of what they do. That's massive. If this ends up being a big old, pardon my language, shit bomb, we don't know. We're not looking at, and there is zero mechanism to pull that back. That's a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to just add on, it's not about, and it's kind of derails a little bit from the original question, which is how are the drugs and the costs originally, it's kind of filtered down into what we've talked about. But when one of the things, this theme of they're all over the place. So what one state is doing, they're learning from another state. I literally just had a meeting yesterday with the Maryland PDAB group, and they were asking me my opinions on Colorado. I participated. I am a patient myself. I participated. We recruited people. And I actually shared with them a letter that we wrote that pointed out from a patient perspective, things that we realized were incorrect based on the survey. And they were shocked because they said they were basing their development on what they learned from Colorado. So opportunity for us to go in. And saying that, what I'm realizing, which is kind of what Jen was just talking about as well, is we're going backwards in time in that we're lumping everybody diagnosed with a diagnosis in one group. We have this issue when we're talking about quality adjusted life years, value assessment. We have this problems with clinical design, clinical trial design. The data that's collected, that's even used in step therapy, is only the generalized patient population. We're literally freezing ourselves in time and going backwards instead of forwards because we're not considering subgroups. What works for me on a medication and could be my miracle drug will do nothing for somebody else with the same diagnosis. So the same thing goes into the subgroups for who's affordable and who's not, who's on Medicare, for example. They're not getting the copay. So they need to think about what is really affordable in the subgroups in addition. So this is a very rushed situation. And Jen, I think that's where we all join arms and go back and we measure the impact and we fill in the blanks because it has to be done. These aren't going anywhere, unfortunately.
We've got some good partnerships with O'Neill Institute to do claims level data evaluation, but it's going to take 2 years before that stuff shows up. And how many people get hurt in between? And that's always a question that I think we need to ask when we talk about these policy considerations and the ecosystem of care. When folks bring up PDABs, what they're talking about are this list price nonsense. They're talking about this one little bitty piece that doesn't happen in a vacuum, but they're talking about it as if it is a vacuum. And I think that's valuable to point out. I do want to point out that there is a particular question in the chat about how we become an important political interest. And what I will tell you is that you do it by giving bad actors bad press. That's it. What is it to turn around and go, you are taking my life-saving medication, the thing that lets me become a teacher, the thing that lets me get married, the thing that lets me have kids, all of these things away from me. What is it to have a video, a 10-second, 15-second ad where you've got a family portrait come up and people start disappearing from it. When you start talking about, I can't get my drug. That does it. That's it. And Tiffany's hysterical because Marilyn reached out to us thinking that Can was the Colorado PDAB at one point.
Really?
It's when we say that people don't know what they're doing here, I mean it. I had a staff member from Maryland call me and go, okay, where do we find this thing on your website? And I'm like, what do you mean our website? They were talking about the Colorado DLI website, not Can's.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt things are going in all different directions. We're all, but feet to the ground doing wonderful things. We all just have to unite. That's one of the things that I know our coalition, our goal is to unite all of the wonderful work and make sure we all are aware of solutions we're coming up with, because then we can come as a unit together and present those to the next state that comes up. So,
and this kind of comes back to a point I want to ask this esteemed group what their thoughts are. As we engage, for example, in Minnesota, we did educational work, educational programs to help educate policymakers of some of the challenges for rare disease patients that could be imposed by a PDAB that that needed to be addressed and were critical to address during the legislative process rather than coming back in the regulatory process and thinking you could fix it. And a lot of, to go back to Senator Kirkmeyer's observation, when, we raised those issues, a lot of folks that are supporting PDABs would just come back and say, oh, you're a shill for big pharma, or you're a shill for this or that. And so in order to categorize you rather than listen and understand that, for example, you're talking about patients that maybe have 1,500 patients, a disease that has 1,500 patients and one therapy. Or maybe you have 500 patients and one therapy in the pipeline and not even a therapy on the market. And you're looking towards that and the hope that brings. How can we break through that noise? And then we'll take on the second part of that, which I think, Tiffany, is your point, which is, moving forward together and how we can bring communities together to talk about PDAB. But I want to talk about that first, is that we have a lot of folks supporting PDABs who want to characterize who we are, what we're doing, and discount our voice. And they're doing it actively and aggressively before we even engage. How do we break through that?
I think it depends on who it is. Because there have been some rather large provider groups that are well funded by their payers that come up with that. I've seen some state health plan organizations kind of come up with that and turn around and say, hey, you've got your own financial interest on that. So let's not talk about financial interest on this. You want to talk about financial interest? Let's talk about the people you're trying to sell this to, right? Which is patients, right? Every time a PDAB passes, there's this idea that it's going to help patients, but that's not who it is. And when we talk about who's actually saving, I think that's one of the best responses that we get is, well, who actually saves on this? Why is that language not in the bill? You don't have a rebate pass-through on this. You don't have spread pricing prohibitions. You don't have anything that directly benefits patients written into this bill. So exactly who are you trying to help?
Yeah, great point, Jen. I'm going to also just piggyback on that a little bit and expand on what you asked, Mike, about how do we get past the stereotype almost that we're being put into. I know when, as a patient and a patient organization, that's two stakeholder roles, and we are seeing not a bad division, just a different role in these two stakeholder groups. Before, it was always patient organizations, often people not diagnosed with the disease are advocates speaking on behalf of a community. That's where a lot of patient organization staff comes in. What we saw at Colorado PDAB, I was working, Anna Hyde, shout out, Jason, shout out, National Psoriasis and Arthritis Foundation. We're all getting on Zoom and talking. And unfortunately, I was the only one who could actually speak because I was the only one diagnosed and on the drugs. They want the quote unquote real patient. Well, okay. But the problem with that, as we talked about earlier, is there's this whole level of newness. We have our traditional patient advocates. We now need to suddenly come forward with patients who have never spoken before. So there's a lot of education on that component, right, that we have to address. But to how we get through this, in my opinion, we are actively in every letter we write, first of all, as patient organizations, saying we do get funding from pharmaceutical companies. However, it is both unethical and illegal for them to guide our decision making. We use it for XYZ. So we are trying to incorporate that. Secondly, I think as moving forward, knowing there's this new movement to get the patient, because they are trying to bypass, in a way, the patient organization, because they feel we're biased in some way, shape, or form. So we need to have the patients also leading the education, but not only as the story contributor. Too often, and we've all been there, we go to the Hill, we go wherever, and there's the patient story, and everybody else gives the education. It is not, patients can understand this. Patients need to be the leader at the table with maybe everyone else as the supplement, right? And that is how we, in my opinion, how we can get over the stigma and put the patients forward.
Right. I think, as I was listening to you, we at RAAP in 2022 and 2023 have been developing our own patient caucus. And our patients are mainly moms, dads, patients, caregivers, and most of them have never interacted through a national organization before. They are advocating for the first time. And I think, Tiffany, what you said resonated with me. My father died of a rare cancer, and fortunately, none of my siblings have been diagnosed with it. There's a higher percentage that we will, but you're right. And when you go into some of these meetings, it is usually either those who have not been diagnosed or those who are just advocating and not necessarily have the disease or a risk of the disease. And they're great policy professionals, don't get me wrong. They're wonderful and they're good advocates. But I think this takes something more. It takes patients who are struggling to get their meds today, patients who have had to work with payers and plans who are running copay accumulator programs. And so families can never meet their copay throughout the year if they take contributions from nonprofits and foundations and things. It's those types of voices who are struggling to actually meet the needs as patients today who will help us change the PDABs and help policymakers understand maybe we need a different approach, and let's work on that approach together. So that's kind of, what you were saying really resonated with me as well, because that's something that we're working really hard at RAAP to build is unique voices, not
Absolutely.
the institutional advocates who do wonderful work, but they're the same voice.
Absolutely.
Not the same voice, but they're,
right.
they're
And
seen often.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify too about the patient, or it's a new world, it's a new era in patient engagement for both stakeholder groups. So so the patient organizations have this new opportunity to educate patients in a creative way that we haven't done before. We're taking a recruiting role, we're taking an education role that just takes things to a different dynamic. So I just encourage patient organizations to look at it as it's stressful, but it also can be an opportunity and an exciting time.
Well, we are running out of time. I know I want to give Derek a moment to talk a little bit more about how you're doing some of your organizing around PDAB. And then unfortunately, we're going to have to conclude, but I've got some thoughts to conclude that in a moment. So Derek.
Sure. Well, and I would just say, to your last question, Mike, too, about, sort of being labeled as a shill for pharma, or, on the side of pharma, on one hand, maybe we should take comfort in the old adage, right, that if you can't win the debate, then shoot the messenger, right? And I think that we're getting sort of labeled that way because of all the things that Jen said, right? There are a lot of questions that need to be asked about these policies, and they don't have all the answers. And so from my perspective, the more that we can ask these tough questions, the questions that we all care about, the better off that we're going to be as we slow these things down, make them better, or get people to abandon bad policy altogether. From our perspective, we're working to do a lot of the same things that we've talked about, but our whole mission is to just elevate patient-provider perspectives in state policy conversations, develop educational resources on the state level processes, and then their impact on the care. Of course, raise the public awareness about access issues all around and these affordability decisions and what's really at stake to make sure that this stuff isn't just happening in a vacuum, like someone said. And then, of course, to go out and impact, shape state level policy decisions around affordability, access, and of course, innovation. And so I think, everything that we've talked about today all goes into that. It takes the individual patients, the individual healthcare providers, and the organizations that represent so many of those individuals as well, collectively coming in and doing a lot of that shoe leather work, being realistic about the way that politics works, finding champions for access within legislatures, but also going out and doing what needs to be done as these boards go through implementation processes too. So I guess what I would say is just thanks to everybody who's focused on this already. And hopefully as we work together, we can bring a lot more voices into the fight this year too.
Thanks, Derek. With that, Kelsey, could you pull up our last couple of slides? So just to kind of wrap this up, and a lot of the questions that many of you have been asking in the chat are around organizing and how do we get information to you quickly? How can we help, provide a way for you to get resources, to get advocates that can help you in your individual states, et cetera. And at the Rare Access Action Project, I'm going to admit this up front, we're not a large organization, but we have a really enthusiastic staff. And so we are really working to help pull together PDAB information that can be utilized, that can be modeled, that can be drawn from, so that you can have access to rare specific information that can help you at the state level. We have just updated and upgraded our ability to scan states legislatively, and we're rebuilding our PDAB page to incorporate an up-to-date PDAB map, where you'll be able to find information on states that introduce, pre-introduce, are moving through committee, having votes, et cetera, so that you get an up-to-date system that you can go back to and find out what's going on in various states and where action is needed. We're pulling together rare talking points that RAAP has used in our various state engagements. As many of you know, RAAP has been very active at the state level, advocating in PDAB, around PDAB, pulling together rare disease information, data, working with local state advocates. And so a lot of the information that we've pulled together will be helpful as you start looking at how you can frame the issues and utilize information at the state level. So we're going to make all the things that we've been working on available to you via our website. We've also had op-ed pieces that we have published. We have some draft op-ed pieces that we have done in anticipation of potential need and that were not used. So we have a lot of work that's gone on, and we'll be able to make that information available to you. We're beginning to pull together economic information and looking at various studies and things that we can bring to bear to help share the story of the impact of some of these policies on the rare disease pipeline, rare disease access, and the impact on patients when they need a therapy, when they finally have a therapy approved and need to have access to it. In addition, we will be providing links to RAAP staff who can help you with not only answering questions, but if you need to pull together talking points, need to bounce ideas, need some assistance with lobbying, they will be there to help coordinate with you and your rare disease colleagues at the state level. And we are also going to be including, you've met a number of people from across very talented organizations today. We will be including in that RAAP page links to their organizations, links to their materials, and we'll be working with them to help with future workshops that we'll be pulling together throughout 2023. So this is a piece that we're moving forward very, very quickly on. We've had a lot of work already gone into it. It will be going live by the end of January, and you'll be able to have at your fingertips some of the work that we've done at RAAP. Our follow-up webinar will be on February 22nd. We are determining the length of time. It may need to go a little bit longer or have much more focused panels. We want to provide that to you. Your feedback is going to be very important to shaping that follow-up webinar. So please, we want you to think about, what you're facing, what's moving, where you need some assistance, and we can engage in those topics in the follow-up PDAB webinar on February 22nd. And then finally, Kelsey Haddow, many of you have seen her emails, and she is basically quarterbacking a lot of our RAAP operations around PDAB. And so Kelsey will be a key contact for you to keep in touch with. If you have questions, if there are colleagues who maybe you want to connect us with, or other ways that we can help support you or help bring resources to bear for you in your state, please reach out and contact Kelsey, as well as other members of the RAAP staff, and we will move very quickly. But you will see an invite to the follow-up PDAB seminar come from Kelsey, and hopefully you'll be able to get to know her throughout this process, and she'll be able to help triage and get you to the right people. We are also going to stay connected with our colleagues who are faculty today. And so we will be happy to help, again, triage you there, triage you where the information is. It doesn't necessarily need to be inside RAAP, and we will try to get you the right information. So I just wanted to share that with you, that we have some resources and we want to make ourselves available to you. Next slide, please, Kelsey.
That is it.
So your feedback will be really important on this webinar. Our follow-up and next steps over the next couple of weeks as we're launching the website. Many of you know we will be actually advocating in a number of states and on the ground. And so we would love to connect up with you and make sure that you have access to the resources that we have, and that we can be helpful in any way. So again, the door is open and we want to hear from you. Again, your follow-up thoughts to this webinar will be very, very important to us. And so as we proceed and move forward to make sure that we're really shaping tools and information that can help you at the local level as well. So with that, we'll conclude our webinar. And again, thank you to everyone who participated. Thank you to our faculty. You all have been terrific, and your experiences have been very important. We look forward to working with you in the various states, and we've actually gotten to work with some of you in our work in Minnesota and Colorado, and we look forward to strengthening that work together. So with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.